Hello, dear friends. Here we are again at midweek. Today is May 13th, my brother Roy's 70th birthday. I don't hear from him very often, so I hope he is doing well. I'm sure if he wasn't, we would have heard. We have received the message from the bishop that worship suspension and building closures have been extended to June 15th. June 15th is a Monday, so that means 5 more Sundays out of the presence of one another. We will not have the joy of celebrating Pentecost together May 31st. However, many of you can attend via Zoom. So I ask you, please do. Maybe we can get a few more than have been coming. If you need assistance in logging on to the application, please let me know and I can walk you through it. We also have people attending via cell phone with no video. It's good to hear people's voices, even if we can't see their faces. Please try to add yourselves to our group of faithful Zoomers at some point between now and when this is over. It's a joy at the beginning and the end of some difficult weeks. I've been trying to keep you up to date on what is happening with me and my new adventure with Bob of finding a place to live. The reality is that with the state shut down, we can't visit any of the potential homes either in Oregon or in California. And so we are at a standstill for now. However, life and church move on. I want to thank all the members of the Pastor Parish Committee who have been working diligently on the plans for a new pastor. You will be hearing or reading an announcement about that soon. Honestly, Zooming and YouTubing are exhausting mentally. But it is getting easier. Still, there is heartache in not seeing you in person. The concern I expressed back on Good Friday, that I won't be your pastor when the lockdown ends, is coming closer to being truth. And there is sorrow in that. There is sorrow and sadness in all of this. This week, I found out that a friend of mine from Montana had died back in March. She had a small heart attack and had surgery on her vessels. But one night she got up and her blood pressure dropped, and they were unable to bring her back. I had known Lois since about 1972. She and I and another friend moved to Los Angeles together in 1976. I think of her as one of my adventure friends. If you knew her life, you would have been amazed. One of her daughters sent me a picture of Lois and my ex-sister-in-law, Rebecca. Rebecca died quite a few years ago. Seeing the faces of those two young women I loved and who are lost to the world made me sad. Bob and I were watching The Daily Show the other evening, and the guest talked about the fact that we are all living with grief, but can't or won't or haven't or don't know how to acknowledge that fact. In what ways are you grieving? Back in 2012, I wrote a sermon on lamentation. Surprisingly, it was a message for the Sunday before Independence Day. How often do we lament on the 4th of July? As we consider how close we are to our day of freedom when we can be safely among friends and families again, are we lamenting the losses that so many states and countries have experienced? Or even at this time when we're realizing we have 5 more weeks of being away from each other, are we lamenting our losses? Are we individually celebrating that we are still alive? I hope so. Usually midweek I send you a psalm, but today it's a revised version of the message I preached on David's Lamentations, 2 Samuel 1. David intoned this lamentation over Saul and his son Jonathan. He said, "Your glory, O Israel, lies slain upon your high places. How the mighty have fallen. O daughters of Israel, weep over Saul, who clothed you with crimson, in luxury, who put ornaments of gold on your apparel. How the mighty have fallen in the midst of battle." Independence Day is a day for parties, parades, and picnics, families, and fireworks. It's a day of celebration even if we don't always remember what we're celebrating. We forget that people were willing to die so that they would be free to worship and believe as they wanted. Are we forgetting those who, in this time in our lives, go to work every day, not knowing what they will find, who they will serve, whether they will get sick and die themselves? When we're surrounded by red, white, and blue, patriotic songs, fireworks, and all that we expect the 4th of July to be, we forget that people died. When we're stuck in our homes or complaining about not being allowed our freedoms, when we're out at the beach unprotected protesting that the beaches are closed to us, are we remembering the people who died for us? People go to work every day for us. Weep, O daughters of America, for those who forget the price that is being paid. David lamented the loss of Saul and Jonathan. We don't practice lamenting here in the United States. A public display of grief is more than we want to deal with. We let people be alone to express their sorrow and sadness. It's rare that we find a community coming together in grief, let alone a state or an entire nation. We don't want to experience the pain, and we don't know how to lament. Our freedoms were won by people who gave their all, and all we want to do is eat and drink and watch fireworks. We would never consider having a day of public lament over what and who have been lost. Public lament makes us uncomfortable. We see it other places, but how does it make us feel when we see it happening on newscasts from Japan or Mexico or China? Jerusalem has a wailing wall where men go to cry out to God. That can be considered corporate lament. We've seen the clips of women and men crying out in grief over the loss of family after a tsunami or earthquake or war or mass shooting. The community expresses its grief together. A sorrow shared is only half the sorrow. Could we ever get together virtually or in real life and cry out our sorrows to God? We're so adamant about maintaining our individual space and decorum that we don't want to be caught weeping and wailing anywhere. Maybe not even in the safety of our own homes where no one will see or hear us. Are we missing out on something? Have we become so civilized and sophisticated that even shedding a tear in public is cause for alarm? 3 of the 4 scriptures for the service I did 8 years ago were about lamenting. Psalm 130 is often used during funerals as a message of hope, but it starts out in a cry to God out of the depths. I cry to you, O Lord. In Mark, which was the gospel for that day, there's the story of Jairus coming to Jesus because his daughter is ill. Before they can get to the girl, people come to Jairus and tell him that his daughter has died. They say, "Don't bother Jesus with this." And what did Jesus say? Jesus responded, "Do not fear, only believe." When they arrived at the house, there were all kinds of people there weeping and wailing over the loss of this child. There were people who were paid to mourn, to wail loudly at a death. It's how it was done. It was a public act of grief. They lamented over losses. Sometimes we forget to let it out. We don't want to bother people or God with our sorrows, and so we simply tough it out alone. If we're truly a community of faith, then we need to act like a community in the good times and in the bad. We will celebrate when we can come together following this lockdown. But somewhere along the way, we need to lament the losses as well. Not only the lives lost 200 or 300 years ago for our freedom, but the lives that are continuing to be lost because of war, injustice, lack of freedom or peace, a virus, random shootings. It goes on and on and on, here and around the world. We should be lamenting that not all countries have the freedoms we have, and yet they have the same sorrows. Cry out, O people of God, for the losses God's children continue to sustain, even as we claim our freedoms. Think about the sorrows in life, the losses, the frustrations, the disappointments, the grief that never seems to go away. Then, if you are able, spend time alone with God. Jesus carries our sorrows and grief. Jesus is present to share in the lament, to weep with us, and then to bring us to a point of healing. I love you all. Amen.